If you want to get super fast and win races in karting, you gotta understand the different types of apexes. There's basically three, and I guess some of you already know them, but what I want you in this video is to really understand deeply what the differences between each of those apex is and when you should use one versus another apex technique. So first of all, let's define what an apex is. There's many ways to define those, and many F1 drivers have attempted to give their own definition, but my definition of an apex is basically the narrowest inside part of the corner that you want to hit to go faster. So basically, again, it's the narrowest point of a corner you want to hit to go faster. So let's say, it could be here, it could be here, it could be here. So again, the inside part, the narrowest inside part of the corner you want to hit to go faster, right? In different situation, it will be you will have to hit it at different places. So that's why in this video we are going to break them down. So the first and most common type of apex technique is the so-called late apex technique. And let's actually mark it in the corner over here. So let's say we're gonna aim to apex here. All right, this is our late apex point. So it means like we are coming into the corner, all right, we're turning quite late, and we are about to apex here, and we're just like, oops, I have a narrow exit. Okay, this is exaggerated. I'll draw it again. But yeah, basically you gotta think about something like that, right? All right. So this is a kind of late apex technique. And when should you use them? Well, you should use a late apex technique when you are aiming to get a fast exit, as obviously as well as the entry, but the priority is mainly towards the exit. And when, again, should you need this? Think about it, in hairpins where you have long straight coming up ahead. Why did I say if you have long straights coming up ahead? Because imagine if you had another corner right after. Imagine if you had another corner, okay? Right after it, you had another corner. Well, I guess you wouldn't care too much about the apex point. Well, in this case, if you had another corner in an opposite direction, yes, it would make sense to kind of make still a late apex. But imagine if because you want to set it up nicely so you can get even a better exit. Well, that was not a good one. But imagine if you have another corner in the same direction, basically. Let's say if something like that, and you don't have a long straight. Well, in that case, you could make an earlier apex. You could do something like that. All right, oh, that's not good. I'm not the best drawer, but yeah, you could do something like that. All right, because anyways, it will open you up. You know what I mean? So that's why I said in advance, if you have a long straight coming up ahead. So if you have a hairpin where you have a long straight coming up ahead, you want to focus on a late apex technique. For example, if we think about a Lonato over here, in the last corner, you're going to focus on a late apex because you're leading onto a long straight, if you consider it a long straight, but I mean, that's the only straight you got on Lonato, right? The major one. For example, if you think about the second hairpin here, you have already, you have another corner coming up ahead, so you're not focusing too much on late apex. It's more of a we'll show you in the next one. I'm not gonna spoiler you. It's also this one. You see, it's actually more of a late apex technique here in the mechanics corner at 10-4. So let's continue with so this is an example of two corners where it's quite clear that you gotta make a late apex because again, this one you have an hairpin and hard under 80 degrees hairpin when you're leading them to a medium straight. So at least you need some really good exit. So again, late apex, your goal is a lot of exit speed. Okay. Yes, you want to still brake on a straight line and you still want to maximize the entry. I mean, as you watch from my other videos, you don't want to just focus on the exit. You also want to focus on the entry, but the goal is that by turning later, you will have the steering more open on the exit. So you're going to have a better, just the tires will not have will have to do too much work, both in terms of turning and throttling. And so they're going to give you, let's say, more grip used for the accident. That when you have low powered cars like Mini, you're not 60 Mini, you don't really have noticed this effect. But when you are driving shifters, for example, or seniors, well, if you try, let's say, if you're going for if you're not going for an early apex, which we'll see that right now, it's gonna basically, and you try to go on the gas, but you're not, facing in the right direction, you're gonna basically get pushed out wide, and so that's why it doesn't work, and that's why the late apex technique works so well. And in F1, when you wanna, for example, think about Shanghai at the end of the long straight, and you have the massive hairpin, you want to focus on a late apex because again, otherwise you will lose so much on the exit. The second one, which we already mentioned now, So I spoiler alert. So it's the early apex. Okay, it's the opposite of the late apex. So the early apex basically requires you to turn in a little bit earlier and sacrifice the exit speed in spite of a faster entry speed. So let me show you. It's gonna be something like that. It's gonna be something like that. All right. I'm not the best drawer. I didn't even make the apex. Let's draw it again. So it's like something like this. You arrive and it's gonna be like that. All right. Yeah. Somewhere like that. So you gotta. He ends up making the apex about in this area versus the blue where he was in that area. So you'll say, oh, let's say, well, why should I make the early apex now? You know, um, the reality is that you will not be doing the early apex technique in slow corners. I'll tell you, unless you have certain things, for example, certain circumstances, like for example, if you have a lot of banking. I remember when I raced at Zandvoort in turn one. I mean, in Zandvoort in turn one, there's a huge amount of banking. If you know it in F1 or F2, F3, if you ever watched it. So, for example, in Zandvoort, for one, there's like so much banking on the inside, and therefore, when you have basically, if you have not ever heard about banking, it's like negative banking. If you have that, it basically hooks you and turns you in, and basically have way more grip. But it was a lot of banking, obviously, on the inside part of the corner. So, what it used to work a lot, it was to basically turn in early and catch the banking, even though that wouldn't make sense in a flat corner. That would be too early of an apex. But because there was so much grip in the banking, you would have to turn in early and make an early apex, because that would hook you around and you would have way more grip than if you went for a late apex. And that's the same thing also in corners like in Sarno. In the last hairpin over there, there's quite a bit of a banking, and you're gonna hook that banking, because that basically gives you way more grip over on the corner. So, by the way, yeah, in general, the early apex, it's prioritizing the entry, and it's not really too much interested on the exit. But again, in some cases, you're also interested on the exit, but it's just for whatever reason you're turning in earlier. Okay, you're turning in earlier for the banking, for the corner radius. Because, by the way, guys, I am not doing a fair comparison here, because I'm comparing it against a hairpin. Normally, the early apex technique will not be used in a hairpin. Why? Because again, in a hairpin, you must likely focus on the exit. The early apex technique is used when? Let me ask you. The early apex technique is used when you have a fast corner. Why? Because again, in the fast corner, you don't really need to focus too much on the exit. It's just about the entry speed. I'll show you. For example, here at Lonato, when we are into turn 1 and 2, this one, for example, this is an early apex, as well as this. Well, this one, I mean, I guess it's a bit the GPS, which is off, but yeah, this is supposed to be an early apex too. Okay, this and this one's an early apex. Why? Because you don't focus too much about turning in late to get away. No, you just have to turn in early and just stay around the curve, because it's just a fast corner. So my rule of thumb is that the faster the corner, the later the earlier the apex, whereas the slower the corner, the later the apex. And that's also amplified when you have more horsepower. Okay, because if you have, let's say, 1,000 horsepower, you gotta focus on making more of a, let's say, V-shaped, and try to straighten up yourself a bit more, because otherwise you're not able to put down the power compared to if you have like just 11 horsepower, as the case of 60 mini. Now the third type of apex, which I guess you have by now already figured out yourself, is the mid apex. And well, basically the mid apex is a compromise between exit speed of a late apex and entry speed of the early apex. So it's somewhere about here. Well, I'm a terrible drawer, I'll be honest. I gotta practice that. Yeah, just take it for the sake of of this video. But anyways, yeah, I mean, don't learn from my drawing. But anyways, it's somewhere about here. So in this case, it's a compromise between the entry speed and the exit speed. And normally, when will you find an apex, a mid apex? So a mid apex you'll find it mostly at 90 degrees corner. Okay, let's go back to our map here at Lonato. Well, you're gonna find mid apex at corners like this one, at the bar corner. Again, I guess it's a bit of GPS. Either the GPS is a bit off, or our driver has a problem hitting apexes. So this is normally a middle apex corner. You're just normally trying to hit it over here. And because again, making it too late would make sense. Making it too early would push you out. So that's like a textbook mid apex. Then you get also the chicane here. It's a textbook mid apex. Pretty much all of the 90 degrees corners will require a mid apex. Okay, not too early, not too late. Okay, that's, and also here the second hairpin, it's more of a mid apex rather than a late apex like the last one. For those who are familiar with NATO, because you don't have again a long straight leading up to, and so you're focusing more on mid apex rather than, and carrying more entry to mid speed rather than focusing on the exit speed. All right, and then there's a fourth, as I said, there's a bonus fourth apex that I was actually, well, mid is entry plus exit. It's a bit of the compromise. Let me actually, so the fourth that I was mentioning at the beginning. By the way, if you have not subscribed yet, please do. It's gonna help me to create better videos and motivates me. I mean, my girlfriend believes everything I'm doing here just has no value, and I want to prove her wrong. And we made a bet that by the end of the summer, so end of September, I'm gonna have 1,000 subscribers. Right now, I'm sitting at 258, I guess, as of this day. But I'm sure we're gonna get to that 1,000. So let's prove her wrong. Going back to it, the fourth, the bonus apex number 4 is the double apex. You'll be like, oh, let's see, but is that really an apex? Well, how would you call it otherwise? I mean, for me, there's no really other ways to call it. So the double apex obviously is that kind of apex that you're going to be using in a sequence of corners in the same direction, which are so close, and you can consider it just one single corner. So for example, again, let's have a look at our map here at Renato. You got a double apex here. Okay, this is the double left, as we call it. The double apex again. I think our driving is having either the GPS is so terribly wrong, but normally AIM tends to be quite good. Either how, yeah, or our drivers just thinks the apexes are lava. So I'm not gonna name the driver, but as I said, I just pick a random session to compare here. By the way, if you ask me what is this colors on the map, basically I color graded the map. It's quite simple. You just click over here and you just choose the color channel. I selected based on throttle. So you can see whenever it's red, it's full throttle. Whenever it's blue, it's off the throttle, and green is like progression. So this is the kind of corner you want to basically hit the apex in two separate places. So this one and this one. But again, I would consider it just one single corner because the driver basically never opens up the steering. So to me, every time the driver keeps the steering turning, it's going to be a single corner middle. Maybe I'd be wrong, but that's how I like to see it. And yeah, this is a typical double apex corner. You don't want to go either for late apex, or a very early apex. It's more of a mid to early apex, to be honest, in this case. But yeah, most of the times, double apex corners are typically early to mid in both. Okay, so in this one, it's quite early. If the driver hooked it here, it would have been quite early. And this one is also quite early. So that is what I had for you guys. Remember, again, there is not one size fits all. Oh, is it late apex better, or is it early apex better, or is it mid apex better? Remember, it depends from so many things. And as I said, for example, already the late apex technique is going to work more if it's going to be leading up to a long straight where you want to focus on the exit. Whereas if you have another corner right away, it's not going to make sense that much, and it's going to be way better to go for an earlier apex. Okay, so it's not just about the corner radius, it's also about the leading up straight after the corner, whether there is a straight or not. And you gotta really here in this video I just had one corner that I wanted to place. I didn't want them to make it too complicated. I just wanted to give you the basics. All right, but the reality is, again, based on different corners, you will have different apex. As I said, the rule of thumb is that normally for all of the early apex corners, we said it's mostly we're using those mostly for the fast corners, whereas for the late apex corner, we're using them for the slow corners. Okay, so again, hairpins, etc. Mostly, again, that's in some cases the opposite, because sometimes you want to go for an early apex in a slow corner, as again, because maybe you have a right away another corner and it requires you, there's no need to basically sacrifice the speed, and so you can carry entry speed by turning in a bit earlier and releasing the brakes, and anyways, you don't care about the exit because you have another corner away. Whereas for the mid corners, yeah, you just have it both for fast or mid or slow corners, but mostly it's for medium speed corners. Medium speed 90 degrees corner. I will mark it down so at least you have an idea. You can take a screenshot, or I'll actually share with you a document where you can download and have all of this information in the description below. You can find it.